Hi, I'm Anand Srinivasan. I'm the Chief Data Scientist at Kaizen Analytics. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank Nancy, Pellin, and Tudor for the opportunity to present in this session. And I also wanted to thank the organizers at Informs for taking the initiative to move this conference to a virtual one. In these socially distant times, this session comes as a welcome change. So let's jump right into the presentation. My topic for today is pricing a subscription service to maximize customer lifetime value. Recently at Kaizen Analytics, we adapted the principles of revenue management to work in a subscription business, and we'll be diving into that a little bit more detail during the course of this presentation. For a lot of you, revenue management is a common term because you guys are practitioners. Some of you may have heard the term in the passing, but what really is revenue management? Uh, for those who are not familiar with the concept, it's simply the art and science of selling the right product to the right customer at the right time for the right price. Right product is all about differentiating the products based on their perceived value by customers. If you think of airlines, it's their way of defining economy class seat versus a business class seat versus a premium economy and so on. Right customer is all about segmenting the customers based on their behavior. So you've got corporate travelers versus leisure travelers. Right time is about understanding what is the value of the product based on when it is purchased. So someone who's trying to book a flight way in advance might be a lot more price sensitive than somebody who's trying to book it at the last minute and really needs to get where they need to go. The right price is all about trying to leverage the information that you've collected so far about the product, the customer, the time of the purchase to come up with the right price that maximizes the value that a customer is willing to pay for that particular product when that purchase is happening. So that's really what revenue management is all about. And where it all began was with airlines way back in 1980s. It started off with a yield management as the definition. The idea made people comfortable with the fact that on a flight from, say, New York to London, two people sitting right next to each other might be paying vastly different prices for basically the same service. Since airlines found a huge success with this concept, hotels started adopting it. But since then, the concept of revenue management has really been used across a variety of industries, from media, using it for ad pricing, dynamic ad pricing, to hotels, and obviously, but also non-traditional industries like golf, and even on the B2B side with UPS, trying to come up with target prices for negotiated deals. If we were to look at some of the early adopters of revenue management, you'll see a few similarities in these industries, which make it easier for the revenue management concepts to be spread across these industries, right? So one of the first one there is the idea of a perishable inventory. Once an airline leaves the origin or a hotel night passes over, if a room or a seat has been unsold, the ability of that inventory to generate any monetizable income is gone. And that's what we really mean by a perishable inventory. But if you think of subscription services, think of products like Netflix or Amazon Prime subscriptions, they're not really perishable. You could buy it today, you could buy it tomorrow. The value remains the same, especially when you're thinking about products with sort of a rolling subscription. And that plays a role when we try to adapt some of these principles of revenue management in these industries. The next commonality is most of the early adopters of revenue management were really trying to price for a single use. So you get to fly once from New York to London in our earlier example. But in subscription industries, you're generally purchasing the product for a usage over a period of time. And this matters because as your usage of the product starts to change, your value associated with that service starts to change. And that is an opportunity for the businesses to capitalize in terms of charging a premium or offering a discount to increase retention. The next aspect is around price memory. Given revenue management involves frequently changing prices, customers are used to the idea that the prices today could be very different from the prices yesterday. On the subscription side, however, every time you try to auto renew a customer for their subscription, you would give them a notice saying, this is how much I'm going to be charging you for your service. And you're reinforcing the price that the customer has paid for your particular service. And this matters because every time the product comes up for renewal, the customers are forced to reevaluate how much value are they deriving out of your product, out of your service, and is that commensurate with the price you're charging. And so the initial price that you sign up a customer on plays a pretty strong role in their ability to renew or retain the customers going forward. The last aspect is the same product could have very different value based on when it's being purchased and by whom it's being purchased. And to some extent, that is also common in subscription industries, because you may purchase a Netflix subscription today because we're all in a lockdown and you need entertainment. But the next time the renewal comes up, if you're an out and about person who doesn't like to watch too much TV, the value you're going to be purchasing with that purchase is going to be very different from what it is today. And so that, again, plays a role in terms of how can you price for the right customer, for the right timing of the purchase. One of the key things in a subscription industry, which is not as important a factor in some of the early adopters of the revenue management, is this whole concept of customer lifetime value. And it's not that the early adopters don't have to think about lifetime value. They do have tools and they do have solutions that address that, but so far they haven't been plugged into the traditional pricing applications to drive the same revenue or margin lifts that the RM applications traditionally tend to do. On subscription, it's important to integrate the two, because a lot of the time is being spent in acquiring new customers and then retaining these customers. And so having a holistic view on customer lifetime value plays a very critical role in how successful is that business in longer term. So what's customer lifetime value? Simply put, it's the present value of future cash flows from a customer relationship. So what does that really mean? Well, it looks beyond every single transaction. So it looks at an aggregate transaction set over a period of time. It factors in future purchases. And so when you start to talk about predictive customer lifetime value, what you're trying to do is predict what's the probability that I'm going to be retaining this customer, and hence get an expected revenue over a period of time to understand what's their total value to you, not just in this instantaneous purchase that the customer is making. And when implemented correctly, it encourages the businesses to start thinking about high value customers rather than just focusing on cheaper to acquire customers. This is a common dilemma where you can spend money to acquire customers early on, and so it shows good on all your financial records. But a year from now, or whenever the renewal season comes up, you're going to be spending more money in trying to retain these customers, or spending money to acquire new customers. And we have taken a little bit of a different approach here, where we've defined what attributes define a high value customer. And the focus is on trying to acquire as many of these and trying to retain as many of these, because retaining a high value customer is not only slightly easier if you know what they're doing, but also cheaper for you longer term. So where does this all come together, right? So if you think about any revenue management system, it primarily consists of 4 key components. There's the customer segmentation, there's the price elasticity, there's the demand forecasting, and there's the price optimization, which combines all of these and comes up with what's the prescriptive or recommended or optimal price, depending on what your objectives are. You have different flavors of these. You could have RM systems that have all of these, or some of these, or all of these, but in varying degrees of complexity even. When we start to think about adapting this for a subscription business, there are a few changes that come along the way. For example, customer segmentation moves into trying to identify your high value and low value and medium value customers based on their consumption of your particular product. And a different set of attributes go into this. how frequently are they consuming it, what kind of content or what quality of the service are they consuming, and so on and so forth. When you start to talk about price elasticity, we do this from the concept of a customer churn model, factoring in price along with all the other factors that normalize what's the likelihood of churn that's not related to price alone. Uh, Demand forecasting remains pretty consistent. We use very similar kind of approaches like your time series models, neural networks, regression-based models. Some of the factors you would consider are, again, very similar. You would consider factors like seasonality, market competition, external factors, things that are not necessarily under your control but influence your customers' purchase behavior. And then finally, all of these come together with in the price optimization module, where we have not revenue, not profit, but overall customer lifetime value as the objective. And we have constraints on price demand that make sure that the recommendations that are coming out are in line with what the business would accept and is ready to get implemented. So we've discussed the concepts so far, and without taking up more of your times, I'll jump into the specific context of where we did this. So the specific business problem was we were working with a client who had a subscription video on demand offering, and the key business question they were trying to solve for was, how do I maximize revenues and subscribers simultaneously while accounting for the growth and seasonality in the business? So we don't want to shoot for revenue at the cost of customers, and we don't want to shoot for subscribers at the cost of giving up the revenue by deeply discounting. So how do we find a balance between the two? And that's where the CLV really helped us align on what would be a good solution for this. Prior to this specific work stream, a lot of the pricing was being done manually with gut-based decision making, and the uniqueness to this particular instance was it's a new product. And so while the new subscriber base is growing year over year at a pretty strong pace, so is the churn. And we wanted to find a way to balance out the two and end up in a situation where the subscriber base is growing while at the same time trying to reduce the churn and make more money in the process. So the way we went about it was we transformed the data and did a fair bit of feature engineering and feature selection. And then we eventually classified the different drivers of a customer behavior into signals that indicate value of a customer versus the intent to churn. And this was done using statistical variable selection on the churn models. And then we optimized the prices on a CLV over a period of 3 years. We picked 3 years based on some empirical analysis on how much content is going to be consistent over a period of time. And so we felt 3 years was a good answer there. But depending on what the specific industry is and the specific application is, that time period could be very different. It could be months even if you're talking about a product that renews on a monthly basis from a subscription standpoint. And then the final sort of work we did on this place was identifying the high value customer set. So we talked about selecting and classifying drivers into value indicators versus intent to churn indicators. So we find the subset of customers who are deemed to be high value and have a high risk of churn. And that's the group that we need to do everything we can to try and understand what are the drivers of churn, how do we reduce that, how do we encourage the right behaviors, and so on and so forth. But then in general, trying to understand the likelihood, the sensitivity of the likelihood to churn based on the prices, and use that to drive the overall lifetime value over a period of 3 years. So the year one that we did the price implementation, we saw a 5% revenue uplift and about a 5 to 10% subscriber increase. And we generated optimal price recommendations at every product at a monthly level, and also provided the high level visibility into the high value products as high value customers, as well as the causes of churn or the biggest drivers as to why these customers are likely to churn down to a single subscriber level. So that's the context behind the solution that's been developed. And we'll get into a little bit more details in the maths behind how this all comes together. So the first one is the churn model and the price elasticity. So we consider factors like customer tenure, their content consumptions. Like I said, this is a subscription video on demand. So we're looking at how are the customers consuming this content, mobile versus desktop consumptions, formats. So short form videos versus long form videos, replays versus live, so on and so forth. What are the different events that are happening in the season, and how does that have an influence on the customers' intent to churn? Price, obviously, fair bit of feature engineering on the price itself for different products. Different transformations on the price played a significant role, and we'll get into that a little bit more. We also looked at how engaged is the customer. So any digital business is sending out marketing campaigns, engagement campaigns with the customers. We tried to understand if the customer's engagement with those kind of emails, is that an indicator of their likelihood to churn or their likelihood to renew, so to say. And the last but not the least, we also looked at marketing attribution. So if you're sourcing your customers through different social media channels, direct marketing, search engines, we wanted to understand where are the high value customers coming from, and what are the attributes of a customer coming from a particular referring domain, so to say. Uh, the prediction itself, fairly straightforward. We used logistic regression. We tried a few different approaches, including gradient boosting and so on and so forth, but we went with the simplicity, not only because it's simpler, but it was also giving us slightly more accurate results. Um, Simple logistic regression based churn models. We transformed the price coefficient. So depending on what transformation was used, we did the empirical math behind the scenes to understand what does that translate into as coefficient for the price elasticity. And we looked at what's the average churn likelihood for new subscriber versus an existing subscriber who is likely to renew this year. And that plays a role when we start to think about the optimization, which we'll get into in a couple of slides from now. But for now, just bear that thought that we did calculate the average churn likelihood for new versus existing subscribers separately. The next model is the forecast model. Again, considering the events in season, the seasonality of the business itself, the marketing spend on a month-over-month basis, and some auto-regressive terms. And we used a simpler regression-based demand forecast models. We tried a couple of higher-order models, but we stuck with the regression, at least as a proof of concept, before we start implementing the higher-order models, just to make sure the change management aspect of the solution was easier to handle. Evaluated the model for the standard parameters. We did a test versus train split. We looked at R square and MAPE as our metric of choice, and went with that. Optimization is the interesting piece. So our objective was the customer lifetime value over 3 years, and we divided the objective into two parts. So the first one is the CLV for the new subscribers, and so here is where we took the demand forecast for the current year, multiplied that with the price, and obviously the demand is a function of price, so there's some element of that as well. But then for the subsequent years, we took the total demand of new subscribers this year plus the retention rate for the new subscribers times the discount factor. Both demand and retention rates are functions of prices, and discount factor is just to try and bring everything to a net present value, so we're comparing apples to apples. On the existing subscribers, again, we took the current total subscriber base and multiplied that with the retention rate that we expect among the existing subscribers, which is again a function of the price. So as we change the price, this retention rate is likely to increase. So if we offered the product last year for $35 for a year, and now the price is $40, the retention rate is going to be very different from if we took the price up to $45. So that's the objective function. We then had constraints around the price, again, to make sure that, first of all, it's a business reasonable price. So we don't want to take drastic price changes on a year-over-year basis. But the other one is a directional constraint on the price to make sure that as your season progresses and there is less and less content to offer in the season, the prices are decreasing in nature and not increasing for any reason. The last constraint is around revenue. And so we noticed very early on that there was a tendency in the optimizer to try and drive future revenue or future growth by maximizing your CLV in the second year and the third year, and giving up a little bit of revenue this year because that's how the retention rate math worked out. And so we brought in a constraint that said we should at least try and keep the revenue where it was last year while trying to grow the subscriber base and while trying to grow the customer lifetime value on the longer term side. So that's the high level price optimization model itself. We did the pilot in 2019, and we have the results for the churn model as well as the CLV optimization. The churn model, as you can see, we broke down the different contributing factors to the likelihood of churn. And as you can see, the more the customer consumes the content, the less likely they are to churn. And the interesting thing is that the higher price that a customer pays, the more likely they are to churn, which is fairly intuitive. But the bigger part is the math that converts that equation into a price elasticity. We spoke a little bit about the transformations that we had done on the price itself. So in this particular example, we had taken the ratio of the price that a customer pays now versus the first time that they had paid when they bought this product. And what we're noticing is customers who have been with us longer term and came in at a much lower price, and the price has gone up over the last few years, are less likely to absorb more drastic price increases as the price goes forward compared to somebody who is entering at a relatively high price. For them, the price jump is not as substantial, and so they still have a little bit more appetite to take on price increases. On the right, we have the price recommendation comparison, and we have the prior price as well as the recommended price from a CLV growth perspective as well as a revenue growth perspective. And you can straight away see the early part of the season where we expect majority of the customers to land up. The revenue growth price would obviously, that's where you try to optimize for just the revenue in year one. It tries to shoot for a higher price, given the product was relatively inelastic. It was trying to shoot for a higher price at the cost of giving up a few subscribers. Whereas the CLV growth price understands that having a higher subscriber base this year is likely to give us a larger lift over a 3-year period than having a tactical objective of growing revenue this year. The net result of all of this, as I mentioned before, was the year one that the solution was launched across about 8 or 9 different products. We saw a 5 to 10% subscription increase by product and a 5% revenue lift. And all of the work that we did around trying to highlight what are the drivers, what are the attributes of a customer churning, brought down the churn by about 3 percentage points reduction. So net, we ended up retaining more customers. We ended up acquiring more customers, and the customers who were acquiring came in at a slightly higher price. And so we ended up having a 5% revenue lift as well. So that's the high level implementation of revenue management concepts in a subscription industry. I think we have some time for questions. I look forward to them, and thanks again for taking the time and joining me in this session today. Thank you.